leading without authority, which again is product managers. We all know this very, very well. We're working with the UX professionals on our team, the software developers on our team. We're launching products. We're responsible for launching these products, but the teams we're working with, they most of the time don't even report to us. So we have all that responsibility, not necessarily the authority though. And that's what we're going to dive into today. And I have a really interesting guest for all of us today, and it's Jocelyn Davis. And Jocelyn, she has written actually many books in the past. One book in particular, which I think is completely relevant for the conversation today, is The Art of Quiet Influence. And we're going to get into what the book is all about and how it is relevant for product people. But Jocelyn, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us here.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Yeah, I guess maybe let's start with the book. You know, what led you to writing The Art of Quiet Influence, and who did you feel like you were trying to help when you started writing this book?
Yeah, so I spent my about 25 years of my former career. Now I'm a writer, but before I was in the learning and development industry, and I spent 25 years with a company called the Forum Corporation, which did leadership and sales training. And one of the programs, the workshops, if you will, that we offered was a program called Influence. And this actually was created long before I joined the company. It was created in the early 80s. And it was a program that was developed by the company because at that time, in the sort of late 70s, this issue started to arise in management training, where people were saying, okay, so this is great, you offer this management training, you're telling me how to be a good manager, but what about all those people who don't report to me that I need to work with? And this was a time when in the 70s, 80s, when those silos, those vertical silos in organizations were starting to break down, and people were needing to work across, sort of horizontally across these, across departments, if you will, across countries even. So this issue of lateral leadership, or leading people over whom you did not have authority, people who didn't report to you, started to become a big deal. And my company, or the company that I was to work for, Forum, saw this as a sort of opportunity, and they did some really great research on the practices that really effective influencers used. And influence was the word that they used for lateral leadership, or leading without authority. So it doesn't mean like, what we say today, influencers are like social media influencers. That's not what it was about. Influence was leading without authority, or leading laterally. So they did this fantastic research and developed a program called Influence that then we delivered to our clients over the following decades, three decades or so, up until about 2010. So anyway, I left that company in 2013, went on, did my own thing, became a writer. I had been at the company, I'd been in charge of product development and product management. So it's a topic near to my heart. But after I left and started writing these books about leadership, it occurred to me, hey, I really should write a book about this research and this idea of leading without authority. Because even though there are books on it, some had been, a lot of stuff had been written about it in recent years, the research that was done at Forum on this topic of influence was just so groundbreaking and so top-notch. And also, I saw an opportunity to combine that research with my own work in Eastern thought, Eastern philosophy. So I have a master's in Eastern classics. So that's the thought of so the intellectual traditions of India, China, and Japan. And I saw some links across these two areas and saw an opportunity to sort of combine them. And that's what led to The Art of Quiet Influence.
Yeah. Well, and for those that haven't read the book quite yet, it ties in these learnings, these insights from 12 Eastern influence sages, I would call them, right? Like these are people that their advice, I would say, is timeless advice. Of course, we're living in the fast-paced world of tech, and you have that experience with product development, product management. Even as fast as things are changing today, would you say that advice, would you say it's timeless, coming from those Eastern influences even today?
It's absolutely timeless. And the quick way that I would explain why it's timeless is there is this acronym that probably many of your listeners are familiar with, VUCA, VUCA. And this was an acronym that maybe 15, 20 years ago, it started to be used in the US military to describe kind of the changing situation, the rapidly sort of faster pace of and ambiguity of, in their case, sort of strategic issues, but businesses picked it up as well. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so that it's sort of a fast way to encapsulate the very volatile, fast-changing, fluid situation that we all face today in business. But the interesting thing is that these Eastern sages were talking about this stuff thousands of years ago. So they were talking about VUCA. Now they would have used different words. So they might have said, instead of volatility, they would have said, well, the world is in motion. And instead of uncertainty, they might say everything is conditional. And instead of ambiguity, they might say everything is fluid. But it's this idea of looking at the world as if it is in motion, contextual, conditional, fluid, as opposed to the much more Western modern view of things as very individualistic. Like we can look scientifically at things, which means looking at their causes and having things be predictable. That's a sort of, generally speaking, a more Western modern way of looking at things. These Eastern sages, ironically, had they sort of foresaw where we are today, 1,000, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. I'd love to dig into some of those insights, at least for some that came out of the book. But before that, one of the things I noticed early on in the book is you talk about the authority myth. And, again, given the topic of the conversation, I thought it might be relevant to dig into that. Can you elaborate more on what the authority myth is all about?
Yeah, so the authority myth is the mistaken view that when you are given authority, when somebody puts a title on your office door, or somebody sort of puts the metaphorical crown on your head, the mistaken belief that automatically translates into power. Mm-hmm. So people very often confuse authority and power. And there's in the first chapter of the book, I share some classic research from Linda Hill, a professor at Harvard, where she looked at a bunch of newly minted sales managers and interviewed them sort of over time as they grew into their roles. And when she first interviewed them, they'd just been promoted into a management role. All of them said things like, oh, well, I'm the manager now. So, what I get to call the shots. I'm going to be able to make the decisions. What I say goes. So they had this idea, as many of us do, that when you get the title, you also get the power. And it's just not true. As we all know, I mean, research has shown this, but we know this intuitively, that it's amazing how how little power titular authority actually gives you. And the reason that it doesn't give you power automatically is because when you are a leader, your job becomes to get work done through others. You have to get work done through other people. And human beings, people, are very, very intractable. It's really hard to get people to do what you want them to do. And just issuing commands, unless you're in a very hierarchical command and control type organization, issuing commands very rarely cuts it. So yeah, one of what I say is that one of the first things that one needs to realize when you are given authority is that nothing has really changed except that you now have a different title on the door. Now, the good news, though, good news is that for those at the product people, as you so well call them, the good news for all of us product people is that the converse is also true, which is that in order to have power, and I mean constructive power, the ability to get work done, you don't need authority. You don't need titular authority in order to have power, because the two are really quite distinct. And there's there's a whole other set of learning, set of practices that lead to being able to get work done with others that really have nothing to do with authority.
Yeah, that's well. I know in your book you break it down into like 3 sections, I'd say, and talking about participation, power, and progress. 3 categories rather, where some of the learnings that came out, they tie into these 3. But first of all, why did you pick these 3? I am curious about that, and then I'd love to dig into each of the 3. Maybe pick one of the insights, and we could kind of drill down further.
Yeah. So the 3 sort of big practices, which are invite participation, share power, and aid progress. Those are linked to the stages of team development. And this is one of the concepts that can be really useful when you're working in or with a team, is to understand the stages of team development. There's the sort of classic way to talk about them. There's a rhyming sort of little mantra that goes forming, storming, norming, performing, which many of your listeners may have heard about. But essentially the idea is that people come together as a team, or it may have been called together as a team, but it takes a long time and work in order to turn them into an actual team that is performing as a team. So there's different ways to label these stages. There's the forming, storming, norming, performing. There's also the one that I use, which is membership, control, performance. But the basic idea is to understand is that there are stages that any team is going to go through. And the first one is really about people feeling like they belong, like they can participate, that they are welcome, that they're going to be, their input is going to be valued, that they are an actual member of that team. So inviting participation is the first the sort of large practice that I talk about, the thing that you need to worry about if you are leading a team or leading any kind of initiative is this issue of inviting participation, making people feel like they are members. The second second stage is about control. This is when it corresponds to the storming portion of the team. So you need to think about the sort of control power struggles that are inevitably going to start once people get through that first kind of enthusiastic, yay, we're a team part. Then people start to kind of jockey for position. There's control issues. There's, oh, well, nobody's listening to me and I wanted it done this way, but this person is, stepping all over me. So there's always fights that happen in along the way. It's inevitable. So what you have to think about as a team leader in that situation is, how are we going to share power? How are we going to align our interests so that these sort of power struggles don't become toxic and kind of sink the whole ship? And then finally, the third stage is aid progress. And that's really about how do you keep it going? Because as we all know, it's, there's kind of there's a natural shelf life for any initiative, for the enthusiasm that keeps it going. But most initiatives have to keep going well beyond the time when everybody's sick and tired of it.
Yeah.
So what do you do as a leader to keep the momentum going, not by micromanaging and not by just stepping back and saying, oh, my work is done. All right, you guys take it from here. How do you keep the momentum going? And that's the aiding progress portion.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to dig into at least one insight from each of those. And by the way, everybody, if you have questions for Jocelyn, put them in the Q&A and I will get to your questions as well. But knowing that first section, if you will, the invite participation, there are several insights that are covered within the book, but one of them is around creating delight. And that stood out to me. I think it would stand out to a lot of product people because when we're developing the products that we're launching, we're for many of our products, we're trying to create delight with our products. In the book, it talks about creating delight with our interactions. And I thought that was really interesting, especially from a leadership standpoint. And I was wondering if you might be able to elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, there's a really interesting concept that again is not often talked about anymore, but it's very useful, I think, for product managers or anybody in this situation, and that is workplace climate.
Mm.
Climate. Climate is not culture. So one of the things about this sort of inviting participation stage is that people often mistakenly think, well, there's two mistakes. One is that people either think, oh, let's just skip all that soft stuff, like let's just get to work. Like, okay, you're the team, you guys are the team, I'm the leader, so let's go. And that's a mistake because, as I said, there is, as human beings, there is no way we are going to be able to just skip the sort of the membership phase, the desire to feel like we are part of something valuable and that we are valued members of that effort. So a product manager who says, okay, we're just going to skip all this soft fuzzy stuff, getting to know you, that's a mistake. But another mistake is that sometimes we think, oh, wow, there's nothing I can do about our culture. We just have this culture. Our culture is very hierarchical, or our culture is very independent, or our culture is this or that. And a very useful way to shift our thinking on this is to recognize the power of climate. And climate is simply what it feels like to work in a place or to work on a team. It's just, what does it feel like? And there's tons of research, which I share in the book, about the power of workplace climate and also how quickly it can turn. Work culture is very non-malleable. It's like set in concrete. But climate is very malleable and very susceptible to what one's immediate team leader is doing. So again, this is very good news for us. It has nothing to do with your title or your authority. It's just you're leading this effort. You're the project manager and the leader of this team. You pull them together. You have an extraordinary ability to impact the climate of that team. And this is when I say create delight, it's sort of a metaphorical way of saying create a positive climate. And there's lots of ways to do that. Again, I talk about all this in the book, but it basically comes down to you yourself having a positive, joyful attitude toward the people that you're bringing together and toward the work. And the things that you do to invite participation, to make people feel valued, to get to know people, to make them feel welcome, to show that you're excited to be there, that you're not going to be, put off by, corporate nonsense or whatever. All of that goes a long way toward creating a positive climate. And then that climate directly translates into performance. So.
Yeah. That's helpful. That's really helpful. I want to cover one more, at least for now, and then I'm going to take an audience question. There are a couple of great audience questions coming in. But that second section, you talked about power, and there was one insight that came out of that section, fight softly. And this was from Murasaki. I might mispronounce this. Murasaki Shikibu?
Shikibu, yeah.
Shikibu, yeah. So it emphasized the power of subtlety and influence in overcoming adversarial situations. And, when we deal with stakeholders as product people, could be on our team, could be extensions of our team, conflict comes up often. So I was curious about this particular section and how it might relate.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to just mention a concept from not that particular chapter, but
Sure.
it's directly relevant to your question, and it's this idea about differentiating between friends and allies
Mm,
and foes and adversaries. Uh, so when you think about sharing power and kind of conflict and control struggles and negotiation, one of the big mistakes that we make as in business is to think that we that our friends that we need to be friends with our coworkers, or and if we're not friends, then we're enemies or foes. And what that ignores is that there's actually not just a two-dimensional axis going from enemy to friend. There's it's a or not just one dimensional, it's a two-dimensional sort of thing, space that we need to look at with friends, and we're enemies to friends, and then allies and adversaries. Um, One of the things that I teach in, and that I found people found most useful when I teach workshops on this topic, is to understand that the vast majority of people that you work with are not friends or foes. They are either allies or adversaries,
mm,
or neutral. And the good news there is that adversaries are really just allies in waiting.
mm.
Because if you can align your interests with an adversary, they immediately flip to become an ally, because allies versus adversaries are based on shared interests. So one of the most productive things that you can do when you're dealing with conflict or power struggles is to shift your thinking from, oh, well, these are people that are my enemies and they're getting in my way and I need to fight them, to this person is an adversary. If I can figure out how his or her interests align with mine, how do our interests align? They will shift very quickly from an adversary to an ally. And then you've got an ally, and allies are really useful to
Yeah.
have. So yeah, that's one of the most popular concepts from the book I found.
Yeah. I love that way of thinking about it. I think that's great. I want to take an audience question here, at least one before, we're getting close to the end of our session. But this question, it's a good one. Can you speak to the relative efficacy of explicit influence, maybe a team establishing a working agreement versus implicit influence, one that maybe models the behavior that they favor? Is that, do you have, what's your perspective on explicit influence versus implicit influence?
Yeah, interesting question. So I'm not sure what the questioner means by explicit influence, whether, but I'm going to assume that if that means that we sort of lay out ground rules, make the ground rules for how we're going to interact explicit up front,
Mhm.
that is one of the big pieces of that inviting participation
Mhm.
stage. Is that and it's one of those things that again is often relegated to soft stuff. Oh, we're just, ground rules. Oh my gosh, why do we have to have, do all this? But yes, make part of what I advocate for is making all this so-called soft stuff um, more explicit, bringing it to the fore. So saying, yes, we are going to take some time now on this team to lay out some ground rules, to talk about how we're going to work together, to get to know each other, to get to know how does Mike like to work? How does Jocelyn like to work? So laying out making those tacit assumptions explicit can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. Well, knowing that we're close to the end of the time that we have, we could have gone all day, candidly. But if there is, and I definitely recommend people check out the book. In fact, I'm going to send a link to Jocelyn's book of The Art of Quiet Influence when I do follow up with everybody. Definitely encourage everybody to check that out. If there is a big takeaway though that you hope people get from this conversation, maybe it's again insights of this book as it relates to the world that we live in as product managers, what might you want that takeaway to be?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the authority myth that you started out with, and just emphasize again the positive side of sort of letting go of that authority myth, which is recognizing that all of us, have potentially a lot more power, positive power, constructive power than we imagine. And rather than chasing chasing authority, chasing approval, chasing a title, chasing resources, it can be very helpful to shift our thinking to how can I lead without authority? How can I build my influence, which doesn't depend on my title?
Yeah. I appreciate that. I think that's a great place to end. And Jocelyn, I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with us here. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody for joining all over the world. Really appreciate it. Again, we run these industry interviews usually on the first and third Wednesday of every month. But when I follow up, I'll give you details about the next one. You could always go to productcollective.com and sign up and go to our member hub, which is right on that page. And you can find out about future sessions there as well. So with all of that, I hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.